Mrs. Happy Catholic here, seeking to bring you authenticity, perspective, and connectedness. Welcome!
Hello, I'm Mrs. Happy Catholic, and welcome to my channel. Today I have on my friend Corina, and she is going to share her story about coming out of Sedevacantism. And I'm really excited to hear your story, Cori. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura.
Absolutely. So I don't know, you want to just start at the beginning, because I think you grew up Sedevacantist, so you never knew anything else before that?
Sort of, yes. So Andy referred to that little group, a Sedevacantist group that he was in originally. And as it turns out, my parents were involved in that as well. So his parents and my parents were, and still are friends. But my parents sort of left that group, before I really became of age to know anything. So I was very young. And his family obviously stayed in it a lot longer, and they had lived about 4 hours away at the time. And so they were much more involved in it than my family was. But what I remember as a kid was, just saying the rosary, loving the rosary, not going to church. There was little talks now and then where, adults would be talking, and you would just pick up on things from this, this group. And, but when you said something or you came in the room, it was kind of shut down and not talked about. So it was always just this mysterious thing that our parents were involved in when I was a kid. Really didn't even know I didn't know what Sedevacantists meant. I really didn't even know much about the Catholic Church. I knew a lot about the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Rosary, things like that. But really, aside from that, I was pretty ignorant. Yeah, so that's kind of my childhood experience. But like I said, our parents were friends, didn't see each other very often because of the distance. But I remember throughout the years, occasionally seeing Andy as we were young kids. And then he had moved here. I think we must have been around 14 or 15. And so he was going through some stuff, and at the same time I was going through some stuff, and I didn't really know much about him other than who's this cute guy, right? So but he shared a religious experience that he had about that age. And around the same time, I had a pretty significant just experience that happened. I won't go into detail, but it was very personal, and it's really what drove my wanting to be in touch with God and learn more. And it was Saint Michael came to my rescue once when I really needed it, and I knew at that moment I absolutely believed in the power of evil, because he came to my rescue, and I said that prayer, and I heard this terrible demonic demon ascending to or descending to hell, and that stuck with me. And I knew if evil really existed, and it was proven to me by that noise, that good really existed, and Saint Michael came to my rescue. So that was the start of my really wanting to be good. I had really, through no fault of my own, was exposed to something that was not good, and so it was an invitation to evil. And anyway, so that's kind of the quick version of that. So I really started to change at that moment too. Just understand, this world is way bigger than me. And Andy was going through his own thing, and I think that's really what kind of united us at the same time. So then anyway, we spent a lot of time together, just being young teenagers and trying to grow spiritually. He was still really involved in that group, and I was learning more about it. And it had a lot of beauty to it and draw to it, in the sense that, they said the rosary, they did good things like fasting and just trying to be devout. Looking back, you see that there was, so the way that group started was automatic writing, which we learned was condemned by the church. So they thought they were getting messages from the Blessed Virgin Mary. But, as I'm learning this from Andy, throughout that, I always had in the back of my mind, like, picking up on things that my parents, or walking in on the room when they were talking about stuff. And so anyway, I feel like I'm nervous. I'm talking a lot.
Oh, you're good. You're doing great. This is just so good for me to hear.
But, those 3 years, Andy and I we grew spiritually together. We wanted to be good. We wanted to learn. I was intrigued by learning more about this group. And part of it, is this draw, like, you're special. You guys are singled out. This group that was receiving messages. And that started, I think, in the, I don't know, maybe this early 70s or something like that, before I was born, obviously. But, and so that's kind of how that started. And so what I remember about being a child was always this draw to, like, where our Blessed Mother is appearing, and Medjugorje, and, these miracle things that would happen, and, weird things like smelling of roses, and all of these things that draw to your senses. But it was more the, I guess, curiosity or excitement of whatever was in the now. And so I didn't really have the root of what is the Catholic Church, or what is the Pope even, versus there is no Pope, or so yeah. So that's kind of the group part of it. And then Andy and I married at 18. Interestingly enough, part of the group that he, and then at that point we were involved in, was, it was always going to be the end of the world. There's no need to, like, better yourself or go to college, or, because the furthest we're ever going to make it is, the year 2000, the Y2K, right?
Yeah, right.
So, it was just simply living, just day to day, and knowing your time is limited, really. And so we married into that group, and it really didn't have a whole lot of emphasis on our lives. We lived here in Kennewick, and the bulk of that group was in the Tacoma area. And so it really wasn't like a daily exposure to anything. So Andy and I just, we said our daily rosary, and just tried to raise our kids as best as we could. And then at some point, our oldest was about 4, and then we had a 1-year-old, and then things changed. So, every group kind of has a leader, and Andy felt called to move our family to Tacoma, and that's when I really started seeing, like, okay, this is weird. So I'm a young mom, and we moved to this town, and I don't really know anybody. And, he's being called to do these, spiritual things in the evenings. And it didn't feel right. I did believe in, the family, and I felt like he was being torn because he wanted to be a good husband and a good dad, but he had this greater responsibility to,
Right.
draw people into what we were, where we were at, and warn them of, things to come. And you know, and so that's really where he was. And so we were there about a year. Um, you know, a lot of this is really embarrassing, but, you know, we were doing what we believed at the time. So we were, I remember being in somebody's home, and, you know, they would have sort of this mass in their home. And, like I said, my son was 4 or 5-ish at that time. And somebody made the comment about, you know, oh, you know, pretty soon he's going to have his first Holy Communion. And it was like a light switch, right? All
Yeah.
of a sudden, it dawned on me like, um, it's one thing when it's like me, but the responsibility I felt as a mom, like, okay, if this is not the truth, I don't want to expose my son to this. And I saw like the struggle, especially with Andy. Like it was, he lived a hard life trying to sacrifice so much for God, and just this pull, right?
Right.
So it became my, um, thought at that point, like we we got to get out of Tacoma. We got to get out of here because kids are being exposed to this, and I have serious concerns at this point. And so I had a missile that my mom gave me, and to be totally honest with you, I didn't even know what a missile was. I had pretty pictures in there, you know, and I remember there was a novena to the Holy Ghost, and it was never known to fail. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna, you know, tuck my kids into bed, and I'm gonna say this novena, and I'm gonna say this novena that we're gonna move from Tacoma back to Kennewick, right? And
Well,
yeah, that was my prayer, right? Just get out of here. And my knees hit the floor, and I just had this overwhelming, um, knowledge. You know, moving to Kennewick isn't going to solve our problems. And so I switched my novena, and I said that novena for Andy and I both to know the truth and to accept the truth, no matter where that led us. And I didn't know if that was going to mean, okay, I'm going to believe in this group thing now, or if it meant, who knows what it meant. But I said that with the most sincerity I had in a very long time, you know, and believing that these messages came from our Blessed Mother. It was, it was a time of, you know, you're taught really not to question those things, because if you're questioning that, you're questioning the Mother of God, right? And so, um, it was kind of a struggle, but I knew it was much harder for Andy because he lived right in the heart of that his whole life. Um, so anyway, that was kind of our Tacoma experience. We
yeah.
went with 2 kids and we came back with 3.
Oh man.
Yeah, so we shortly after that moved back to Kennewick. You know, he still was believing wholeheartedly in the group, and I was kind of pulling back from it. We still said our rosary, and one thing I know about Andy and I, we always I felt like we always tried to do our best for what we knew. We tried to do, the best to live our faith.
Yeah.
So we're back in Kennewick. Things are kind of just back to normal for the most part. Um, and then I would say probably about a year later, is when, um, he really got uh, some news that shut down the whole group thing. I think he touched on that video. I'm not sure, but then he knew, okay, this is not true. We both were able to just put that whole thing aside. Um, Not saying it was easy. It was very hard seeing Andy go through that, because that was intertwined with his life from the time he was born. And so he really struggled. And internally, I was like, oh, I'm so glad that that's done, because it as it was exposed, was weird. Um, and so, for probably, you know, I want to say it was like 3 months. And first he kind of shut down altogether, and then he was just searching. I knew he loved the Catholic faith, but we were convinced that was not even an option. And so where do we go, right? He's really feeling this pull. And so then a little while later, his uncle had talked to him about the traditional Latin Mass. Now his uncle was still in Tacoma. When we left Tacoma, he was still very much involved in that group. And at this point, he had moved on to the CMRI, the traditional Latin Mass. And I should back up and say, while Andy and I were living in Tacoma, I would pass that church sometimes just driving and just think, oh, if only, and Andy actually, that group, some of them got to go on a little field trip to see what the traditional Latin Mass was like, very skeptical too, I think, just, because they were the chosen ones in the group. And so he brought home a pamphlet, and it was one of those, how to make a good confession, where, I had read that and thought, oh gosh, these confessions that I would do in the group were very, very vague. And this pamphlet was pretty detailed. And I just remember, I have done some of these sins, and I want to confess them sincerely. But who do you confess to? Because you don't know. Anyway, so back to Kennewick, back to, now Andy is entertaining the thought of making the 4-hour drive back to Tacoma to meet with this CMRI priest. And in my mind now, I'm not going to be duped again. Why do we have to go 4 hours? And so I decided I'm just going to go down to our local Catholic church, right? And I went down to the Catholic church, and I had my head covering on, and never had been to a Catholic Mass, right? I've never been there. I didn't know what to expect. But those key things that were always pointed out were, the priest faces the people now, and women don't wear head coverings, and, just little things that you are fearful of. Sure enough, I went there, and, and then I went away thinking, and so then I was like, okay, let's go to Tacoma to the CMRI chapel. We did. At this point now we have a 1-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And Andy had gone there first, I think maybe a couple weeks before, just to kind of feel it out. And now we were making the trip there. We were going to be conditionally baptized. Andy and I were due to have our marriage solemnized, right? Yeah. And so it was a big trip. And I think at that point I was still a little skeptical, it still felt kind of weird. Yeah. So we went to this church, and it was beautiful, beautiful statues. Women had their head covered. It was just, much better than being in somebody's living room, right? So it was a step up, right? So I remember just being in awe, this is beautiful. Well, that was kind of short-lived because, as you have small children. 10 minutes, we were tapped on the shoulder and told to leave because our kids were little and making some noise and stuff. And so I remember being escorted out of the church. And it really rubbed me wrong because we had traveled with 3 little kids for over 4 hours to do this. And here 10 minutes in, we're being asked to leave. Oh. And so I think I was ready to just drive home. And Andy's like, no, we're meeting with the priest after Mass. So here we are. We're sitting in the car now, waiting for Mass to be over, to go inside. And then after Mass, we went inside and we met with the priest. And I got to tell you, I fell in love with that priest. Very kind, patient, understanding. Um, I don't even know how. He just won my heart over. And to this day, I have a lot of love for him. He really did just strike me as a holy man. And so those layers were kind of being peeled back, and I think, okay, yeah, this is it. And we were at that church for hours and hours because all three of the children and Andy and I were conditionally baptized. Andy and I were married, and so it was a beautiful day in our world, right? So
Yeah.
it was a nice. It ended up being a really beautiful day. Um, and so Andy found out that particular priest, it- we found out there was a closer CMRI chapel to where we lived than that place, and that was Spokane. And turns out that this priest was going to be transferred there because I found out later the priest that was currently there had left.
Oh.
And it wasn't really, why did he leave? Nothing was ever really talked about. It was just, he lost the faith and he left. So this wonderful priest that I had just met, he was going to be even closer to us. And he was going to be the head pastor now in Spokane, which was only, 2.5 hours away from us rather than 4 hours. And I was sold. And
Oh
so
my God.
we started making the trip to Spokane as frequently as possible, and would get the kids up, do the long drive, go to mass, do the long drive home, and but we were just so grateful. Again, it was, here we are, we're kind of this select group, right? We only ask the truth, and we're in this little safe haven, I guess. It turned out not too long afterwards that the priest, he wanted to come to Kennewick to offer mass, of course, in our home. I think with the hopes that it would draw other people in. And so they would call it a little mission church. And so it started off like once a month. He would come down and have mass at our home. And, it was always just really close family. It was Andy and I and the kids, and then his sisters and their kids. So it never really grew. Every now and then someone would call because they put my phone number on like this traditional Latin mass like website or something, and so people would call, and sometimes they would come once or twice, but it was limited. And the only thing I'll say about that is, while we were incredibly grateful to have the sacraments, it always felt unnatural to have that in our home. And like, a home is a home and a church is a church. It didn't feel right. And to have that with our kids, I look back now and I think, yeah, that must have felt very strange to them, to do this. And I always I had this feeling that it had to be perfect because obviously, Christ is in our home. And so I really turned into like a crazy woman, like trying to be perfect, and, then freaking out if kids like mess something up or whatever. So anyway, that went on for several years. I don't know really that there's much more I could say about that, other than just the experience was odd.
Yes.
So going to mass, though, it had everything that I was drawn to, all the externals, the stained glass windows, the beautiful altar, the reverence, the Latin. I was blown away by that. It was just, this must be true. This must be right. This is beautiful. And I will say this, I learned so much about the Catholic faith, and I will forever be grateful for having been taught that. A lot of it was like listening to some of the nuns on cassette tape,
Mm-hmm.
or as our children went through their first communion and their confirmation, they really had to study and prepare for what that meant. And Andy and I too, for confirmation. And so really that was the heart of learning the faith. And so I'm so grateful that I learned the Catholic faith during that time. So yeah, so that was kind of our experience that went on for 20 years of, once a month a priest coming here. There must have been 8 different CMRI priests that would come through and have said mass over here, and we got to know them pretty well. So going to the Mount, we much preferred to go there, because then it's not like your whole weekend of being crazy trying to turn your house into a church. And,
Right.
and so but going to the Mount, it's interesting because we would go there probably once a month, if possible. And it was strange because I always felt like we weren't really truly let into their circle. It's almost like we were outsiders, and maybe they didn't trust us or something. I just felt that. There were just some strange little things, like, I felt like we got a what for one time when our 6-year-old son didn't have a suit jacket and a tie on. And I'll be honest with you, we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor at the time.
Yeah.
And we were just happy to go to mass. But again, that feeling of not being worthy to be there, or to be in their circle. I don't know. It just, there were just some few little things like that just really, wanting to be referred to as Mr. or Mrs., which is kind of a cultural thing. It was just different. Very, a feeling like this is a huge family up there, and we're like not really in the family, I guess.
Do you think it would have been different if you'd been local, like living local, or
yeah, absolutely. I looked at the kids, right? So our kids were growing up in this, and those kids, they had other kids, and they were all so close, and everything they did was like this group feeling of like they had each other. And here we are, we're isolated. We just have this one little house in the Tri-Cities where there's mass, and our kids didn't have anybody that could relate to them here. But if we had lived there, I think it would have been different. Yes. They were very much intertwined as families. And as our kids grew older, they became friends with the kids. And it kind of went from being outsiders to like, oh, our kids maybe are, they were used to only each other. And now maybe our kids they're cool because, at that point, we've proven ourselves by having gone there so long. So our kids made friends with some other kids there, and so that was nice. But being back in Kennewick, I just thought there's this despairing mentality that comes with it. Like, how are people going to know? How are people going to be saved? How is God going to fix His church? And this like feeling like, okay, well, maybe one day like there'll be this beam of light from heaven that will shine on our house and people will know where to go,
Yeah.
So,
the Star of Bethlehem is back.
Right. So, just speaking myself, I don't know that I realized it at the time, but I very much look back and see this in myself of, a few things. Number one, just being very judgmental, even if I'm not vocalizing it, but internally, of other people. They don't know what I know. So at the Mount, I felt like all of their kids were sheltered because they went to school there, because they had each other. they weren't exposed to the things that my kids were exposed to, which is life, which is reality. Of course, I wanted to homeschool my kids. I didn't have the confidence that that I could teach them well, right? And so we sent our kids to public school, and we always tried to counter that by teaching them at home. But they were exposed to some things, and I remember just trying to protect them from that and shelter them. And if they were hanging out with friends that maybe didn't talk right or dress right, it was this like mother wanting to protect them. But it was despairing. I see that now with my kids, especially one of them. Like, she had friends who had real struggles, and I just wanted to cut those people out of her life because they were maybe doing things that were wrong. And so, look, the mentality I had was you have to be good and right and perfect, and otherwise you had to maybe build up this wall because you didn't get close to people who I made up my mind who's going to go to heaven and who's not. I mean, that's kind of an extreme, but that's not what Christ taught. We love each other, and we try to draw each other to the truth. And so I see that looking back, like that must have been very hard for our kids. Yeah.
I understand why you would feel like that. I mean, you're so isolated, so you feel like everything is just hanging on you and protecting your kids, and it's also important. Like, it is important. And then you're just trying to deal with it, and you're like, I can't even talk to these other families because they're not dealing with this stuff. So it's just me. And like, I mean, what kind of friends did you guys have as adults? Like, did you have people that you would like call on the phone and visit with, or that you could ask advice from? Like, did people share about stuff like this, like concerns, or what was going on in their hearts about things?
Yeah, it's interesting because going way back to when we were teenagers, Andy and I really, our friends, they got older. They went to college, or they went to the bars, or they did their thing. And it wasn't that we intentionally cut out our friends, but we were just on a different path, and we, in a sense, Andy and I grew up together during those young years. And he was my best friend, and I feel like I was his best friend. We had each other that we leaned on a lot. And, of course, family, his sisters, especially, like, and they knew our background because they lived it. So it was easy to connect with them. But as far as outside of that, not really. And when I went to the Mount, I always, I tried to be perfect. I tried to look the part and, I guess put on this persona that I was perfect. And in fact, like, even my name. So this, like, okay, everybody has always called me Cori. My real name is Karina, but I've never gone by that. But because it was like on our paperwork when we met that priest for the first time. So my real name is Karina, but he pronounced it Corinna. And so I never corrected him on that because I think in a weird way, I was like, well, he's like perfect. And who am I to correct him? So it was like my, what do you call it? Like alter ego. So when it was like the week for Mass, Corinna came out, right? Like that.
Oh my gosh.
It was bizarre.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Like, I can see how that would happen, but
yeah. But I just had so much respect for him, and I still do. I really do. But I look at it now, and it was like, I am not, at heart, I'm not Corinna. It was almost like a Stepford wife type thing where you wanted to just be the perfect, right? And the favorite, and that's really, I never felt like I was who I really was. And honestly, it's not that I'm some terrible sinner that had to pretend like I was this put together person. But it's weird that just kind of evolved. That's just what it was. And that wasn't me. So anyway, I went way off.
Oh, well, it was my fault. I asked you. So you're talking about, you're talking about being in the CMRI for 20 years. So your oldest son was like 25 when you left?
Let's see. Yes, so our oldest is now 28. I want to say he was, I think it's been like 5 or 6 years since we left. Yeah. So I'll kind of get to the heart of how that all happened. A few years before, Andy, I started noticing a change in him. And he was listening to EWTN, and that was my first like, what's this, right? And so I kind of had a guard up, but at the same time, I was noticing just him really growing in all the virtues, just really a sincerity in him. And I think early on at one point, he tried to have a conversation with me, and I was like, we are not having this conversation. Like, we don't even go there. Like, because to me, I couldn't separate this opinion of being a Sedevacantist with the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church. And so the mere fact that he was even entertaining some things freaked me out. Like, oh, I better pray for him because, yeah. So so then it was about, I want to say it was like 2 years where I knew he was going through this internal thing. And it definitely was showing with the way he talked about people with kindness. So sometimes I think just it comes natural as a Sedevacantist to kind of, when you're around people, like, you just bring up these like key points that you hear that are wrong with the church, or the Pope did this or the Pope did that. And I remember Andy, he went from doing that to making subtle, kind, factual corrections. And I admired that about him, that he was still wanted to know the truth about it instead of just somebody said it, so we'll believe it, right? I know he was going through struggles with having a priest come to mass. Like, I could just see it weighing on him. And at one point he said, he tried to tell the priest that, hey, we will just come there. We'll just come there more often. You don't need to come here, because honestly, it was easier for us to get up and do the drive and go to mass and do the drive home than it was to spend the whole weekend just obsessing about this, right?
Right. Every weekend. Oh, well, once a month.
Yeah. Like, usually once a month, sometimes twice a month. But so he tried to have that conversation a couple times with the priest, but it never really got shut down. And then, so probably about a year before I kind of went through my change, we were supposed to go to the Mount St. Michael's in Spokane to go to Easter Mass. And, we already had family up there that was going to meet us there. And then we were going to go out for Easter breakfast after Mass. And we had done that drive so many times over the 20 years, right? And for whatever reason, we just were like, oh my goodness, we're running so late, we're not going to make it. We're just simply not going to make it to Mass. And so we just felt like we had this. It's interesting looking back, because we felt like we had this Sunday/Easter obligation to go to Mass, and the only Mass available was in Spokane. And here we are, we're late, which is funny because the other Sundays that we didn't go, we just, we excused ourselves and just did our own thing, because, you know what I mean? So it's interesting that we had that thought. So, so we're thinking, okay, well, now we have to wait for the 5:00 Mass in Spokane, so we can make our Easter duty and our Sunday obligation. And so then I thought, well, the CMRI has another chapel about 45 minutes away further into Idaho. Maybe we could make that one. And then Andy said, wait a minute, there's a SSPX chapel in Post Falls, which is basically just a little bit further. So he said, look up and see, what time that mass is. And I'm like, I'm nervous now, right? Because it's the SSPX. And Andy assured me, he's like, no, remember, Father Casimir said you could go to mass there if need be, right? And that was years before we were in a different situation. And so I was like, okay, well, if he said that, then we're okay. And sure enough, like God's perfect timing, we were literally like 20 minutes away from that church, and literally in 20 minutes was their Easter Mass.
Whoa.
And so we went there, and I didn't know what to expect. We walked in, and I think in the vestibule they had Pope Benedict's picture, and I was like, whoa, where am I? And so, but we went into the chapel. It was a beautiful chapel, right? It had all the same as the CMRI, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I was shocked by that. And it was a full house, and they were bringing extra chairs into the church because it was probably because of Easter, and obviously I'm making judgments. Okay, these women are dressed reverently. These men have suits on. They're genuflecting. The priest is facing the altar, not the people. And so it spoke to me. And at the same time, I'm guarded, right?
Yes.
But what that did is made me realize, okay, it's not as small of a fishbowl that we live in as I thought it was, right? Now we're a little bit, there's other people who think like us,
Yeah.
But we did not stay. We didn't talk to anybody. We bolted after that. I think it resonated with us. One thing we did after that, for like a solid year, I think we got some graces. We faithfully said our daily rosary for that year, whereas before I think we it got away from us a little bit. Not that we weren't, but it just this kind of we got to saying our family rosary together again. And so fast forward a year. Now at this point, I know Andy, like he had said things like no one can judge the Pope. Like it's in canon law that no one can judge the Pope. And so I knew where he stood on that. And although the CMRI always, taught it as an opinion, that was their thing, was just, it's an opinion. But it was really it was more than an opinion, right? And so the last time that we had mass in our basement, I remember, during the sermon, the priest saying something like, absolutely, Francis is a heretic, or like, just matter of fact, like he declared it, whereas Andy knew it was their opinion. And I remember holding my breath because I thought, is Andy going to shut this down? Like, what's going to happen now? Because I knew where he stood on that. He's like, nobody can judge the Pope. But remember, I still had all this just love and admiration for this priest. And, never would we have wanted to disrupt mass, but that stuck with me. And anyway, it turns out that was the very last time that we had mass in our home. So during that next month, Andy, he'd been going through this big struggle. He and I didn't really talk about it, although I knew he had, some doubts. And I just, like, I was letting him go through that, but at the same time, I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I can't say that over the years, I didn't have these moments of just where you knew something was off. Or one of the things that has always stuck out with me was, I think it's in Matthew, the parable about the wheat and the cockle. Do you remember that? And they grow together. And I'm not very knowledgeable, but my understanding was like the servant had said, basically, should we pull the weeds? And no, because you risk losing the wheat. And so you grow till the harvest. And I just had always thought, well, but that's not what the CMRI did when there were things happening in the church. They just excused themselves from it, right? So I don't know if that stuck with me, but that stuck with me. And then, so anyway, this all came to a head when Andy, he shared his story. I'm assuming people have watched that, but he got the confirmation from our Blessed Mother that yes, indeed, this is not right, and he's putting an end to having mass at our house. There's no turning back with him, and initially, I was being a big baby. I'll just say that, yeah, because I was very concerned how this was going to affect our family, especially our son. That was, yeah, it was very difficult. And during this time, we were getting ready to have a big celebration for his graduation from college. And so I had asked Andy first, he wanted to talk to our son, and that was the first person he wanted to talk to. And I said, no, I don't want to steal this wonderful time from him. Let's wait until after we have this party for him, and then we'll talk about it. Like, he should just enjoy this. But so during that week, I knew we were going to be having a conversation. I was torn, but I wasn't completely opposed to it because I knew some things just didn't feel right. Our home is not meant to be a church. I was not meant to be this crazy woman, Corinna, right?
Yes.
So, and so there were always things that didn't feel right. Now, I'll back way up and say initially, I was so excited to be in the CMRI. And for many years, I would drive by our local parish and just have like disgust as I drove by, just anger and feeling like, people have taken over the church. And, and then the last couple of years, I would drive by and just have this longing. I wanted that. I wanted to be a part of Christ Church, and it should be everywhere. Like,
Right.
it shouldn't be this special place that you have to drive far away to go to. So anyway, the way the whole thing got exposed, people overheard other people talking about, what was happening. And so it crumbled the way it was meant to happen for us to share, mostly Andy to share where he was coming from. And so I always feel bad because I'm the one that like, hey, let's wait. Anyway, so during that time now, we had some family members that were just heartbroken, and I was heartbroken, and just going through this really strenuous time. Initially, I remember just basically telling the kids, no matter what, just keep your faith. And, Dad's just going through something. And so I own some of that. That was me, because I still couldn't separate the opinion and the faith.
Right.
So Andy, at this point, he is so just in awe and happy that he has confirmation that what he's doing is right, and he's trying to figure out where he can go to mass, but he has this like happy, peaceful joy to him, and it made me mad. I'm going through this like serious anguish, like back and forth of what is happening to our family. What am I, what is going on with me? I had this memory, the same priest that we just loved so much. So one day he was just sharing something really beautiful and about the faith. And I remember literally saying, oh, Father, I'll just follow you. I know I'll be okay. And he corrected me and he said, no, Corinna, follow no man. And that stayed with me. It really stayed with me. And so at this time, I'm thinking, I can't just follow my husband because he's my husband. Not in regards to my faith.
Yeah.
I can't follow this priest that I love just because he is a holy man. No, I'm responsible for my soul. And so that's really what started it for me. But I'm not saying it was like this moment of, okay, now I'm good, because it was. The first thing I remember was Andy. So that very first Sunday after our Blessed Mother told him, showed him the way, he was going to go to the diocesan Latin Mass, and he invited me, and I was not going to go to that. Right. So instead I went down and I put my kayak in the river, and I just had myself a little pout, and I was crying and going through emotions. And so I remember just having this, how could he do this? And while I'm going through all this anguish, Andy was patient with me. He was kind, he was loving, but he never pushed anything on me. And so when I was out on the kayak, I was thinking, you know what? He doesn't wear a wedding ring. Well, it never bothered me before, but I just thought, well, if he's going to go down to this church, I don't want these women to think he's available, right?
I love that.
So I was like, okay, well, he just needs to wear a wedding ring, period. And so that was on my mind, which was kind of a weird thing. And of everything going on, like, that was weird. And then, so then I remember his sister had come over, and his uncle was in town at this point now, because they were just kind of blown away by each other and what they were both going through. So now all of a sudden, his sister is also, she is seeing the truth of this. So I'm sitting on my couch, and they're in the dining room, and they're going over my sister-in-law's potential annulment, that the CMRI granted her an annulment, but they are now thinking the CMRI doesn't have that authority, right? Yeah. So, but again, there's this real peaceful sense between the three of them, and I'm just like in agony over here, right? Pouting, like, what? Why are you guys all so happy? This is tearing me up. Yeah. So, so anyway, this week, some weird things were happening. God was working with me too, in my stubborn way. Well, for one, Andy had moved into the guest room, and it took me a minute, because, well, for one, I thought, well, maybe he's upset with me because I'm kind of pouting. And then I thought, okay, I started to realize he was not sure about our marriage, right? If the church would recognize our marriage. And so that kind of got me to think about this little thing that I dismissed called jurisdiction, right? And so I went to bed that night, and I was tossing and turning all night, and I woke up to this. I don't know if it was myself screaming it or just something in my dreams screaming it, like, wake up. And it said, the moment you stop hating the church is the very moment you'll begin to love it. And I was like, ooh, whoa.
Wow.
And thought like somewhere along the way I had heard that, but I couldn't put my finger on like, where did that come from? And it was driving me nuts. And so at this point, like I didn't really want to open up to Andy until I figured it out for myself. But I knew I didn't want to distance, you know, he's my husband, right? I didn't want to put, and I knew he was sincere. So I didn't want to have a big wedge between us, but I wasn't ready to show my cards yet.
Yes.
It was killing me to know, like, where did this come from? And so I did. I opened up to him and I asked him, like, hey, do you know where that came from? And he said, yeah, that came from Chesterton. And I was like, oh. And he was like, why? And so I told him. And he was also like, I think at that point, he was just so confident that Our Lady was going to take care of things. And so he didn't push me. And so that was the first real big, okay, yeah. And then somewhere during that week, again, I'm going through this battle in my head, and it's almost like a discernment. I picture it like you have, the angel and the demon, and you're just this battle back and forth. And I remember just feeling so sad because I could see it in my family, in my kids, and it was a really hard time. And I was out in the garage and I was sitting on my moped and just having this sort of angry bitterness of what was going on, and just, like, why is this happening? And, our peaceful little bubble was kind of being shaken up, right? And
Yeah.
I looked down at the mileage on my moped and it ended with 666, which always freaked me out, right? And, that, I didn't like that. And so, of all the stupid things to think, I, remember my husband now, he's so peaceful. He's so happy, right? He just is this calm, just very just at peace person. And I'm like wreck of like, ugh. And so my thought, oh, I bet his moped is going to like have 333 or 999. Cause we had talked about those being like special numbers, And I literally got up and I went and looked and I went, like, it really was. It was 333. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, all right. That's like,
Oh my gosh, the Trinity is stamped on his moped odometer. Wow.
But really, Laura, what did it for me, like I said, I knew I couldn't just follow a man. I loved my priest. I loved my husband, but this decision, my soul, I'm responsible for that. And so, the only thing at that time that I trusted, right? The only thing that I knew I could trust, I'm going to show you because it's like, I'm so grateful for it. This book, right? Okay. The Catechism Explained, exhaustive book. And I trusted it. Like I used that book. In fact, I think we bought that book at the Mount in the gift shop, but it was, it's a very old book. It's the Catholic faith. And that night, I just sat down with that book. And I remember before I opened the book, I was just praying very sincerely, like, show me, God. I don't know what to do. My heart is open. Just let me see the truth. I just want to see the truth. And I go back to that novena because part of when we got out of the group, and we went into the CMRI, remember I had said that novena that Andy and I would both know the truth. And so that was a big part of the CMRI was I thought that was the answer to my prayer, that Andy and I would both know and believe the truth. And I look back and it was definitely God had his hand in it. That was a bridge for Andy and I to get to the full truth. So I stayed up with that catechism and I read about the church, the marks of the church, what jurisdiction really meant. I read about the papacy, and I when I shut that book, and it was hours later, I knew 100% where I could no longer go to mass anymore. I couldn't go there for the sacraments. And it was um, I don't want to say it was sad, because I knew it to be true. I absolutely knew I couldn't go to the CMRI anymore, but it was sobering. I guess maybe that's the word. It was sobering. And um, it was the truth, but it was a very hard pill to swallow, because I loved that church and I loved that priest, and I wanted so much for that to be true. But at the same time, I was resigned to know the truth. I was ready to know the truth. And so Andy and he was working already. I didn't know it, but he was working on trying to figure out where to go. And he opened up to me a little bit during that time too. And anyway, this was funny. He had said, you know what, we're both going through a lot right now. What do you say we get out of town next weekend? Maybe we go to Coeur d'Alene and just have a relaxing weekend. We need a little vacation. Well, that was his way of selling me on, somehow I got to get her up here because we're getting married on Saturday, And so,
because he had it planned, but he didn't want to tell you he had it planned.
Yeah, he was letting me go through stuff, but he was confident, right?
Yes.
And it was, it was hard in the sense that, okay, wait a minute, here we go again. Now we still have to drive several hours to go to a fraternity of St. Peter, right? And I was very guarded going to that church. But again, it had everything. It had everything we were missing, but it also was in union with the church, right? But we still got to have the Latin Mass, and there's still reverence, and so we had a lot going for us. So we went up to the Fraternity of St. Peter, and the first time we went up there, they weren't quite ready. They had to just get a little more information and talk to the bishop to kind of figure out how they wanted to deal with our case, and so we were a little bit like, I remember still being on edge, like, what do you mean? Andy and I have been married for all these years, and I really felt like whether or not our marriage was valid, we were committed to each other, and we always did what we thought was right. So we were never intentionally outside of the church, right?
Right.
So, I'm still guarded, thinking, I don't know, but it was just another week later, and they did our profession of faith, which was very real to me. You have to acknowledge the error that you were in, and we were in error. It was not through our own fault. I don't if we knew we were in error, I think we would have done better. And that's kind of what happened with the catechism. I knew when I closed the catechism, if I went back there, I would be wrong. And now to me, it becomes a matter of conscience, right? Where before I didn't have that. Now I know it. And now if I went, it would be wrong. And so I had that certitude. And so anyway, we made a profession of faith. We were received into the church. It was beautiful. It was amazing. And then, as we're coming back home, I'm thinking, okay, obviously it's not realistic that we can do this every Sunday. And where do we go from here? And so, long story short, we were the traveling trads for a while. We were seeking out traditional Latin masses approved by the diocese, of course, right? Yeah. And just doing these little pilgrimages from week to week to chase down those Latin masses. But I will say this. Andy didn't say this, I don't think, in his interview, but when we were at St. Joan of Arc's, the FSPS or FSSP, Andy had, he struggled. He said, I don't know what to do, Father, if I'm forced to go to the Novus Ordo. He's like, there's abuses there. I don't want to participate in those abuses. And the priest was so awesome in his response. And he said, Andy, he said, was Our Lady and St. John on Calvary? And Andy said, yes. And he said, were there abuses there? And Andy said, yes. And he said, did they participate in those abuses? No. And I have goosebumps right now. And so that was so profound, right? But even so, we still did that year or so of, every Sunday we'd find a new place, to go to mass. And then what happened was COVID happened and they shut everything down. And I remember, we were doing the live stream every Sunday, and I went through this like profound, even if it's the Novus Ordo, I just want to go to mass. I had this like deep longing to go to mass. And so I should back up. Okay.
There's more.
The one time where we were not able to travel, it was Christmas time. We had our family in town, and we had, Christmas things going on with family. And so it was just not going to work out for us to travel somewhere to mass. Right.
Yeah.
So at this time, Andy and our bedroom is in the basement, right? And the kids were upstairs. So we snuck out for midnight mass. We snuck out the back door, and we went down to our local mass. This was the first Novus Ordo mass since getting out of the CMRI, right? Yeah. And I have to tell you, and we met his sister there, and we were all like in tears because, we're trained to I don't want to fault the CMRI, but my mindset was always suspicion and judging and analyzing, right? And
right. You got to protect your faith. You got to be ready for everything, ready to identify all the problems. And her
skirt is too short, and he didn't genuflect all the way, and all of those little things. Like, I was hypersensitive to all of that, and I feel bad because what I didn't do was I let that distract me from what was really happening at the altar. And but that was my first experience. Was I wanted to like throw up, and all of these scary things that we were taught. Some of those things were there, but anyway, so we made our obligation for the midnight mass, and we snuck back in the house, and nobody ever knew we were gone.
Wow.
And then we the year of chasing the masses, and then COVID happened. We didn't have mass available, and that longing, I was homesick, and I really wanted to go to mass. And even as we were traveling to go to all the little Latin masses, there was still something. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be in this special group of, storm chasers, I guess, right? I didn't want to be anything special. I didn't want to stand out. And so God really answered something in my heart during COVID, because it stripped everything away, and I just wanted to go be with our Lord and celebrate the mass. And it doesn't matter if the choir is not perfect. It doesn't matter if Joe doesn't genuflect all the way. I started looking at the people in a different light. Like, what, they're like me. They're like me. They're not perfect, but they're there to know, love, and serve God. And it was just a change in my heart. And, we were always told, one of the things that stood out was that, people no longer went to confession. Everybody received Holy Communion, but nobody went to confession. And I'll tell you, the first time I went down local to confession, I was blown away. I mean, there were so many people in line for confession, and it was 4 priests, and it was like 2 hours. And so, yeah,
Well,
people did take their faith serious. And all of those little layers started getting peeled back, and all of the slanderous things that were being said about the Pope or the church. For a while, I would start to look into them. And then at some point, it just is so absurd that I don't have to concern myself with those things. That's not my swim lane. I need to stay in my swim lane as a lay person and trust Jesus when he said he would be with his church. And I trust that. And he didn't say my church will be perfect. He never said that. There's a human element and a divine element. And the human element is never going to be perfect. It's a hospital for sinners. And that's where I want to be. That's where Cori goes. Corinna doesn't go there, but Cori goes there. And I feel at home there, and I love going to mass. It's scary for me to say that right now, because you start to think, well, who's going to listen to this or whatever. But if Jesus is there, then I'm happy to be there. I'm honored to be where Jesus is, and I truly 100% know that Jesus is at his church. So I love that. Another thing I'll say is I started looking. I have always taken marriage absolutely seriously, right? And what it stands for. And when I started thinking about how Christ, the church is the bride of Christ. And I think about what that means. Husband and wife, they are forever. That's a forever commitment. And Christ would not abandon his bride. He would not do that. No matter what his bride did, he would not abandon her and take up another bride, right? And so he's not an adulterer. He's going to stay with his bride. The wheat and the cockle are going to grow together. And when God is ready to correct that, he will correct that. And I just, those things stayed with me. And I just, like I said, Laura, I'm not a theologian. I don't know the answer to everything, but I'm most certainly at peace with where I am right now. I have so much hope that I feel like I was missing the hope. I had a lot of despair over, just thinking it's the small group versus right. I'm just a part of something so much bigger, and it's beautiful. I feel just at home. Yeah. And the other thing that I just want to say is it really, I don't want to go into slinging mud. I really don't. I want to just tell my story. But I think it's important for my story to say on Andy's behalf, he is my husband. I know that man better than anybody else. And the things that he has been called by some Sedevacantists, not all of them, are absolutely horrible. He has been called a heretic, a Freemason, a sodomite, like just these terrible accusations. And I think of, who is the accuser? And I just want to stand up for him and say, he is none of those things. He is a sincere, honest, God-fearing, only wants to do right. And so that's part of why I wanted to tell my story, is to just vouch for my husband. Not that I need to, but I want to. He is a good man, and anybody who says otherwise, they don't know him, and I know him. So I feel like I can speak the truth on his behalf. So.
Oh, that's awesome, Cori. Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure for everybody that I'll put Andy's interview down in the links, the description below, so you guys can go watch his side, because it's just so beautiful to have you guys, your shared experience, but it's so unique. And I just think that's so fun to have both of those perspectives, and for people to really get into it and, let it speak to them, because there's all kinds of people that need to hear what you're saying and that need to be guided by that inspiration. And you're such a witness. I just think it's awesome that you would come on and share this.
I had a lot of apprehension, and I probably didn't say things very gracefully. But what I want people to know is, despite anything I did to deserve it, God really worked within me and Andy. And really, the truth is, if people are seeking and they have an open heart, God will show them the truth. And the other thing is, people have to remember the Sedevacantism position. It is an opinion about the Pope, and people can question that, and they can look into that without denying their faith, because that's not what the Catholic faith teaches. And so I just would encourage people, if you have any sort of question about this opinion, uh, look into it. And it doesn't mean that the Pope is always going to be perfect and do and say everything correctly, because that's not true. But another thing I heard was, uh, I said something one time like, that's not my Pope or something. And somebody pointed out to me, look, your dad, not my dad, he's really not a bad guy, but your dad could be a jerk. He could be an alcoholic. He could be a bad guy. He could be, just the most terrible person. But the DNA is still going to prove he's your dad. And that's me too. Like, okay, yeah, I I could see that, and I'm not saying the Pope is an evil, rotten, dirty guy either, but it's not my swim lane to pick him apart. My swim lane is to know, love, and serve God and live my faith. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great, Cori. Awesome. I just wanted to ask if you wanted to speak to this at all as the mom,
Okay.
and you have kids. You were going through this with kids, because sometimes I have people ask me, like, especially if their kids are kind of older, when they're starting to transition out, and they want advice for how to navigate that and help their kids, talk to their kids about it, or deal with their kids maybe kind of going back and trying to figure it out. Like, do you have any reflections or advice you would offer for that?
It's interesting because with my kids, I feel like all three of them, it was different. So my youngest, she was pretty open, I think, and it really wasn't too long after Andy and I were received in the church. She went up and she was received into the church, and I've just seen beautiful growth in her. We have another daughter who, she was a big instrument, I think, in planting those seeds early on about this doesn't feel right. Because I think she recognized, even like in middle school, that something is not right here. This isn't, she told me one time, one of her friends, she said, he's Catholic and this is not Catholic teaching. And I don't remember what it was in regards to, but she picked up on this, that there's something not natural, not right about this. And for a long time we couldn't talk to her about religion or God or anything. And now and I had this despair, or just absolute despair, distraught over her no longer believing what we believed. Yeah. And now I have this, she's not a participating Catholic right now, but I see beyond that, and I have so much hope and love, and I see what a wonderful mother she is, and all of these things that are just a joy, and that I can talk to her now without this, it doesn't matter that she doesn't believe exactly what I believe. I know that God works with people in different ways, and so that's kind of my story with her. And then with my son, he's living true to his faith, and I'm so proud of him. He is knowing and loving and serving God to the best of his ability, and I'm proud of him for that. We went through a struggle in the beginning, and it was so painful for all of us. And I think he knows my heart and I know his heart, and I think that's just a really good place to be. we don't have to see exactly eye to eye. And I'm not going to throw mud on anything that he believes or where he's at. And I think he's come to that with us too, you know. Um, it that was kind of my biggest worry about talking. I would never want to hurt him. I'm so proud of all of my kids and where they are. But I see that God worked with me in a special way, and I thought, well, I'll just tell that story for what it's worth. So,
oh, I think it's beautiful. And even like you said, praying that prayer to the Holy Spirit and then going to the CMRI thinking, we're there, but then realizing that was a bridge to get you to the next place. And it's like, and continuing conversion, it never ends. Like until we're dead, we're going to be entering more into the fullness of truth and God's vision for us. So that is so cool to see that playing out, and that you guys are open to being guided on that path, even though it's kind of scary or like, wow, what is this new thing? Like, or it hurts and I'm not sure the way forward, but it always becomes clear at the right time. And you just went with that, and you're like, I see God working, and I see him working in my kids' lives, that he's doing the same thing for them, just leading them little by little.
Yeah. So much more hope and peace than I've ever had. Just absolute trust and hope and peace. Oh, one of the questions that you had asked me in an email, I think I just feel led to just share this a little bit. You had asked me like if there was any special prayer or things or people that have helped me. And I will say this, I kind of stole this from a church I was at. Somebody left it in the pew, little pamphlet, and it was it's called the Litany of Trust. And I am telling you, that is something I really was lacking in what I was raised with and involved with, was just that trust. Jesus, I trust in you. It's an absolute beautiful litany. That prayer has helped me so much. And so I would just recommend that. The Divine Mercy, we were kind of, the little bit that was touched on was, I don't know about that. That's, they removed the Sacred Heart from that picture. And so guard up, right? But it's I think especially for these times, that's a needed prayer, right? It's the Divine Mercy, not the, it's important to have the balance of justice and mercy, of course, but you can't hyper focus on one or the other. You have to have it balanced, because you will despair. You will lose that hope if you don't balance it. So
that's great. Oh, I think you're so on top of that. It's so true. And I think that a lot of people in this time we live in, at least in Western culture, it's so hard to live right now in a lot of ways. And so that message of mercy is really one of hope. And that is so heartwarming to people. It's like, really? Is that possible? Whereas the fire and brimstone, like, fire and brimstone exists. We're not denying that. But to emphasize it today doesn't have the same effect that it did in previous generations, because people are needing they need, what the church has always done is adapted her approach to what is going on at the time and what people need the most. And so that's why she shifts her language. She adds these devotions and promotes certain things. It's so beautiful. She takes care of us.
Yeah. That was one big thing too, is learning the difference between changing dogma and changing discipline, right? The church can change the disciplines, and I couldn't separate that before either. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cori. This was wonderful. It was such a gift for me to hear your story.
Thank you. And feel free to really shrink this down and edit out a lot of my blab.
No, I think it's perfect. I love it.
Well, I hope it can help somebody. I really do. Just if you're looking for the truth, God will work with you. Yeah.
Right. What a great note to end on. God bless you, Cori.
God bless you, Laura. Thank you.